President Donald Trump hosted Jordan's King Abdullah II at the White House on Tuesday and renewed his insistence that Gaza could somehow be emptied of all residents controlled by the U.S. and redeveloped as a tourist area. The audacious but highly unlikely scheme to dramatically remake the Middle East and would require Jordan and other Arab nations to accept more Gazans, something King Abdullah II reiterated after their meeting that he vehemently opposes. The pair met in the Oval Office with Secretary of State Marco Rubio also on hand. The president suggested he wouldn't withhold U.S. aid to Jordan or Egypt if they don't agree to dramatically increase the number of people from Gaza they take in.
We're going to keep it, and we're going to make sure that there's going to be peace, and there's not going to be any problem, and nobody's going to question it. And we're going to run it very properly, and eventually we'll have economic development at a very large scale, maybe the largest scale on that site. And we'll have lots of good things built there, including hotels and office buildings and housing and other things. And we'll make that site into what it should be.
And Mr. President, take it under what authority? It is sovereign territory.
Under the U.S. authority.
Mr. President, you said before that the U.S. would buy Gaza, and today you just said we're not going to buy Gaza.
We're not going to have to buy. We're going to have Gaza. We don't have to buy. There's nothing to buy. We will have Gaza.
What does that mean?
No reason to buy. There is nothing to buy. It's Gaza. It's a war-torn area. We're going to take it. We're going to hold it. We're going to cherish it. We're going to get it going eventually, where a lot of jobs are going to be created for the people in the Middle East. It's going to be for the people in the Middle East, but I think it could be a diamond. It could be an absolute tremendous asset for the Middle East. You know bullies? You know what a bully is, right? You know the bully, I've always, and I found it throughout my life, a bully is the weakest person. And they're bullies. Hamas is bullies. The weakest people are bullies. You know that, right?
We were just in the Oval Office with President Trump and the King of Jordan, and they were talking about the future of the Gaza Strip and the ceasefire deal with Israel and Hamas. President Trump says he does not think Hamas will comply with terms of the ceasefire deal and that all bets are off starting Saturday at noon. The pressure is on Hamas to release the remaining hostages in order to keep the ceasefire operational, and Israel has signaled is ready to restart hostilities if they don't get the hostages out. They presented sort of a friendly relationship, sort of a united front in discussing the future of the Middle East, but it was clear they weren't exactly on the same page.
The Palestinians, or the people that live now in Gaza, will be living beautifully in another location.
President Trump has insisted that the United States should take control of Gaza, have that be U.S.-controlled territory, and the Palestinians, we're talking about 1.5 million to 2 million people, should live elsewhere.
We have to look at the best interests of the United States, of the people in the region, especially to my people of Jordan, and we're going to have some interesting discussions today.
While President Trump was very out front on saying the U.S. should control the Gaza Strip, King Abdullah was much more reserved, said he would take these ideas into consideration, said they would be discussed, but not coming right out and saying he does or doesn't want those things to happen. So definitely a question mark on how that relationship is going to continue.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is threatening to withdraw from the ceasefire in Gaza Strip and resume its fight against Hamas if the militant group does not go ahead with the next scheduled release of hostages on Saturday. Hamas said Monday and reiterated Tuesday that it planned to delay the release of 3 more hostages after accusing Israel of failing to meet the terms of the ceasefire, including by not allowing an agreed-upon number of tents and other aid into Gaza. Amid the mounting tensions, U.S. President Donald Trump emboldened Israel to call for the release of even more remaining hostages on Saturday after meeting with Jordan's King Abdullah II at the White House. Meanwhile, the Arab League Secretary General Ahmed Abul Gheit is warning that Donald Trump's plan to take over Gaza and resettle Palestinians will threaten a fragile ceasefire in the enclave and fuel regional instability. He gave the warning during the World Government Summit in Dubai. He says if Trump pressed ahead with his plan, he would lead the Middle East into a new cycle of crisis with a damaging effect on peace and stability. Trump enraged the Arab world by declaring unexpectedly that the U.S. would take over Gaza, resettle its more than 2 million Palestinian population, and develop it into the Riviera of the Middle East. And now for more on this development, international affairs analyst Dr. Marek Laskiewicz joins us for some analysis. Marek, glad to have you join us. Let's start with what's happening with Zelensky / Russia and of course the U.S. Zelensky says he's willing, to hold peace talks, give his land. I mean, what provoked this change, and how monumental is this change of tactics on the part of Zelensky?
I'm afraid it's only a minor change at best. Zelensky has not, in fact, done very much except to offer to swap his tiny amount of Kursk territory for some Russian-held Ukrainian territory, which the Kremlin has simply rejected out of hand, and therefore there's been no progress on that front at all.
Right. And Trump's, like you said, I mean, it was going to be the next question, but Russia has rejected that. Why do you think they did that? Why are they rejecting that? I mean, it's a peace move.
Because of two reasons. First of all, they are winning. They are about to take Pokrovsk sometime in the future, and therefore they don't need this swap. In any case, they've recovered a great deal of the Kursk territory held by the Ukrainians and think they can recover the rest without any swap. And secondly, Trump has now opened direct negotiations with Moscow about the future of Ukraine without Zelensky being there. So it's going to be, as far as Russia sees, a decision with the Americans without really any Ukrainian participation, although they will be informed. And that therefore, for both these reasons, what President Zelensky said was simply rejected by President Putin.
One then wonders, what's on the mind of Trump? Why isn't he involving Zelensky and talking directly with Kremlin?
Because Trump's goal is simply to end the war, and he does not actually like Zelensky very much, as far as one can see. He once called him the world's greatest salesman because he kept leaving with $50 billion after a visit. What he wants is an end to the war, and if the terms are favorable to Russia, so be it. And therefore, Zelensky is seen as an irritant, and from that point of view, will not have a direct input on the talks.
What's your thinking on that? That doesn't sound, I don't know whether to use the word democratic, or doesn't make reasonable sense to the entire world. I mean, it's not just Kremlin, or unless you just want to kowtow to Kremlin and not minding whatever with Zelensky.
Quite right. It's the second one, and you can go further than that. President Trump really has no interest in what the rest of the world says. He has a quite clear plan. There will be peace there. And if the terms are not to Ukraine's liking, he doesn't care, because he can cut off aid and that will be that. Actually, his vision of the peace plan involved European troops and anyway non-USA troops policing it. And without Ukraine being in NATO means that USA will simply be able to pull out of the entire war in any sense of contributing any more to it. And in that way, USA will be free of this foreign entanglement. And it's quite clear Trump there simply is not interested in what the rest of the world thinks about his plan.
Interesting. Well, Zelensky says, listen to this, he says security guarantees that would not involve the U.S. will not be real guarantees. And then the U.S. Secretary for Defense has ruled out both a return to 2014 Ukraine frontier and NATO membership to Ukraine, peace to be guaranteed by troops, but not USA's.
Precisely. If there were no US troops there, then Trump has got clean out of this foreign entanglement without any of his boys dying should it go wrong, without any money more being committed by the USA to this black hole, if you like, in terms of military aid. And on top of it all, Zelensky is quite right in saying that without the US guarantees, it's meaningless. And that's the whole point. You see, for Trump, what he is concerned about is finishing this war as far as America is concerned. And here comes the nasty part of it. As I stated in my books, if Russia starts winning, and this will be a very clear victory for Russia, there's no obvious reason why they can't win elsewhere. There are plenty of other Ukraines on its frontiers where there are a huge number of Russians and inside other people's territories, which they could easily also take in the same way. And therefore, at present, President Putin, like indeed as Russia, like indeed Israel, is on a roll. He's never had it this good in the sense that in the White House is somebody who's quite prepared to meet his terms to a very large degree, if not all of them.
From what I hear you saying, he doesn't give a hoot. Zelensky can go and hang himself for all he cares. But what is the NATO?
Right.
Have NATO reacted to all this?
Well, NATO actually is curious because, if you like, it's always had that attitude that Ukraine perhaps could be in, perhaps not, but it's certainly very unclear that NATO ever wanted Ukraine in for one reason. As long as there's a territorial dispute, and there was one even pre-2014, in the sense that Ukraine's frontier with Russia, there were rumblings of discontent already before then it follows that it can't be a member of NATO, because the primary, if you like, condition that a country has to meet to be in NATO is to have no unsettled frontiers. And therefore, for NATO, the rest of NATO, if Ukraine were to join, it would be very difficult to do so under the current laws. Or worse, it could result in a war, which would mean other nations would have to contribute, and there are no state to do so. Without USA, Ukraine cannot carry on the war.
Oh boy, that seems to leave Zelensky in deep waters. But Zelensky, this issue about US, if there must be guarantees, USA must be involved. He is supposed to discuss with Vance on Friday. Do you suppose he will bring up the proposal to offer American businesses lucrative reconstruction contracts at his meeting with Vance on Friday? That's on the contract in Munich.
Yes. He undoubtedly sees one way of influencing American policy by putting Ukraine's raw materials up for sale, so to speak. And that therefore, yes, he will be offering. The question is, what does America prepare to give for such an offer? And actually, Trump has laid out more or less the other way around, that he sees this as an opportunity by means of getting hold of these materials, including many rare earths, to actually reduce the financial debt, so to speak, he has incurred by USA has incurred by means of the aid. So for Trump, this is nothing more than aid recovery, if you like, and therefore it is unlikely that Zelensky will be able to, in fact, influence American foreign policy much with respect to Ukraine and Russia as a result of this offer.
Ukrainians are outraged at Trump's comment. I think they said something like senility. Outraged at his comments on Ukraine being Russia one day. Surely that should be a no-no. Trump should know better than to make such statements. What do you think?
This is an interesting one because it really boils down to what you define a nation. You see, the Ukrainians, or at least some of them, are quite clear. They are not Russians. However, until relatively recently, shall we say 20, 30 years, Ukraine was seen as part of Russia, an integral part of Russia. And for example, when Catherine the Great to the partitions of Poland, it was on the basis, amongst other things, that Ukrainians and White Russians were a type of Russian. So for centuries on end, Ukraine has been seen as a part of Russia, and now, of course, Ukraine say they're not. Well, the interesting question is, ultimately, are you prepared to fight for it? It's quite clear that some Ukrainians are, and therefore it's quite clear that an independent Ukraine is certainly desirable by some Ukrainians. But it has to be said historically that some Ukrainians did look to Russia before, and of course during World War II, they were also, some of them on Germany's side. So what I'm saying about this is, it is by no means not as clear-cut over the centuries as one would imagine that people are saying now. However, if now there is a quite clear majority of people in Ukraine who don't want to be Russians, history is of secondary importance. However, it does explain why Donald Trump, who, please remember, is quite an old man, thinks in those terms, because for many, many years of his life, there was no Ukraine. It was a part of Russia, USSR to be exact.
All right, before I let you go, just this one last question. The situation in Gaza, Marek, and the fragile peace deal gets messier, with Israel threatening to resume intense fighting in Hamas. If Hamas refuses to release hostages by Saturday, are they taking a cue from Trump's statement?
Yes. Here, Hamas, I think, has made a mistake in overreacting to whatever relatively minor violations Israel made. In this sense, they've gone too far. They've now put themselves out on a limb. They can't even carry back to the phase one in the sense of releasing just a few hostages. And the problem is that if they now release all the hostages under USA threat, they'll have shown themselves to be very weak. And if they don't, they are liable to have a terrible onslaught. And this terrible onslaught may well, of course, be a precursor to a very unpleasant future for Gaza. And so therefore, as things stand, phase two is very doubtful whether it will go ahead, and phase one looks like coming to an end very soon.
Oh, well, it's interesting that the USA doesn't want to put its boots on ground in Russia, in Ukraine. But Trump is proposing that in Gaza. We'll leave it there. We'll see how events play out over the next couple of days. Thank you so much, Marek, for your interesting analysis.